And we are back. I know this was a very short break, but I promise the next one is going to be longer. So after being at the theater, it's time now to visit a cultural heritage garden. And it is really my pleasure to have Lindsay Bywood from the University of Westminster in the UK, whom I have the pleasure of knowing since around 2010, probably, when I was visiting audiovisual companies in London to learn more about the industry, and in which Lindsay really had a very active role. She still does, but now she's mainly in the academia. And she will talk about how cultural heritage locations can become very fertile experimentation locations, but also trusted collaboration partners in accessibility projects. So Lindsay, thank you again for being here today. And we're really looking forward to your colorful, I know it's going to be a very colorful presentation. Thank you. Microphone.
Better. Thank you. Thank you very much, Alina, for that really lovely introduction. Despite having two screens, I actually can't see anyone or myself. But I can see my presentation, so that's something. So yeah, my name's Lindsay Bywood. I am a white woman in my 50s. I have very short red hair. And I'm wearing a headset. I'm also possibly, although I can't actually see myself, a little bit dark. The way that my home office is set up means that this morning the sun is shining directly in my eyes, so I've got the blind shut. So great for the sun, but a bit of a shame for the fact that I have to draw the blinds. So my presentation is called Devisualising the Museum from Access to Inclusion. My first slide has a very colourful picture of sort of different balls of wool in different colours, and the idea behind that was to represent a sort of multi-sensory experience of texture and perhaps smell, and also obviously colour. Okay, let's move on. Thought that wasn't going to work, and it did. Okay, so my slides have mostly white background with sort of orange lines on them. What I'm going to talk about for the next sort of 25 minutes or so, I'm going to start off with talking about the background to the research that we've been doing, and then I'm mainly going to talk about two projects. One is an online tour of the Chelsea Physic Garden in London, and the other one is a PhD project. And I should have said at the beginning that Jessica was meant to be here with me, but sadly she's not able to be here today. So I'm going to present her project, and obviously I'm on the supervisory team. And then hopefully there'll be some time for questions after that. So I want to start by saying that all of this work takes place in a UK context. So I'm sure that there are commonalities in lots of other places, and I would be really interested in hearing about that maybe afterwards if people have other experience to share. But in the UK, access to museums and heritage for blind and partially blind people is quite sporadic and quite for want of a better word, patchy. So for example, I know, and I'm not going to name and shame, but I know that one of the very large heritage gardens in the south of England, if you want an audio described tour, you need to go, they're offered once a month on a Sunday at 9 o'clock. And I don't know about you, but I don't really think that Sunday at 9 o'clock is a particularly pleasant or sociable time to be visiting a garden. But that's when you have to go if you want audio description, and that's quite common, and it's not at all to say that that indicates that access isn't important. Often it's a resources issue or just a kind of priorities issue, really. And that's something that we find quite unfortunate, really, and yeah, it's not ideal. So the work that I've been doing with my collaborators, and there are several projects, and I'll talk about the other projects at the end, is based on the principle of blindness gain, which is a principle that was a concept that was introduced by Hannah Thompson from Royal Holloway. And it's the idea that living with blindness can teach us something. So it's based on 3 pillars. The first pillar is that blind living is an art. The second principle is that blind people experience the world in a multisensory way that can be helpful in thinking about experience generally, and can be helpful to non-blind people, and that has value. And the third principle, which is a sort of more applied principle, is that techniques that are used to provide access for the blind and partially blind are also helpful for everybody, or can be helpful for everybody. So the team that's been working on these projects is multidisciplinary. So we have people from translation studies, obviously, we have people from psychology, we have people from museum studies, we have practitioners, museum practitioners, audio description practitioners, and it's very much multidisciplinary work. The other 2 sort of underpinning principles to the work are the fact that previous research has shown that audio descriptive techniques can benefit sighted people. That's work by Rachel Hutchinson and Alison Erdley, also from the University of Westminster. So our sort of starting point really is, if it's not actively detrimental to the general public or to non-blind people, then those techniques should be incorporated to allow access. So it's a sort of inclusive design approach. The other underpinning idea is that access is not binary. So access is not about people who need access and people who don't need access. And in thinking about this, we thought about that research, and I can never remember the number, but I know there's been some research that showed that people going to art galleries, most people only look at pictures for a ridiculously short amount of time. I think it's something like 17 seconds or something, but don't quote me on that because I can't remember. And it's the idea that there's this assumption that people who are non-blind, for example, and don't require sort of traditional access accommodations, can access art and heritage. And we find that a bit problematic, because we don't think that's necessarily true. There are lots of people that don't go to galleries or gardens or heritage sites. There are lots of people who do go, but may not be able to engage with what they are presented with the experience. So we like to think about accessibility as more of a spectrum. So from sort of requiring no support to requiring lots of support, but in between, there's lots of different ways that people may benefit from support to access art or heritage gardens. So they're the kind of underpinning ideas to the work that I'm about to tell you about. So the first project that I'm going to talk about is the virtual tour of the Chelsea Physic Garden, and my slide has actually a still from the video which shows very multicolored chili plants. And this project started in late 2019, and that was the start of our collaboration with the garden, who were incredibly open and are incredibly open and enthusiastic about working with us on these kinds of projects. We got some funding to investigate inclusive multisensory tours, again, along the lines of, if you can make a tour that's accessible to people who are blind or partially blind, but also sort of enjoyable for their sighted companions and other sighted people, why wouldn't you? So what we wanted to do is we wanted to empirically prove that this was the case. And then, of course, we all know what happened in 2020, and we couldn't do the work that we wanted to do. So we changed the methodology, and we decided that we would make an online tour, an online garden tour, using multisensory language. So what we did was we sort of upended the usual filmmaking process by which you would storyboard and script, and then basically the audio description would come at the end. We put audio description at the beginning of the process. So right from the beginning, we worked with student filmmakers. I'm not going to lie, partly because they were cheaper, but mainly because we felt that they would be more flexible and open to changing the way in which they worked, and that proved to be the case. So we worked with student filmmakers from the very beginning. We all worked together, including an audio describer and audio description accessibility academics, and the multidisciplinary team that I talked about earlier, and the garden. So the gardeners and also the tour guides. And so everything was collaborative, and audio description and audio descriptive techniques were there right from the beginning. So we started with we looked at the garden tours that they currently provide, and then we looked at the potential for those tours in terms of audio description, multisensory, language multisensory experience. We're not perfect, and probably some of you will have already spotted the large mistake that we made in our planning, which was we did not have anybody who was blind or partially blind in the team at the beginning. And that was that's a big learning point for us, and it was a bit of a rookie error, really. So we did involve a blind consultant later on in the process, once the first draft of the film, the first rough cut of the film was prepared, but we should have done that right from the beginning. So I'm going to play a little bit of the film. I'm really crossing my fingers that technology is going to be kind to me. Bear with me while I load it up. So, okay, looking good so far.
Chelsea Physic Garden occupies 4 acres of land on the edge of the River Thames. It is London's oldest botanic garden and has been connecting people with plants since 1673. In this short film, we will explore this green oasis in the centre of the city and immerse ourselves in what it has to offer. Here, on a warm, late September day, visitors stroll through the lush, walled garden or relax on the covered cafe terrace. City sounds hum in the background. They intermingle with bird song, resounding from many well-established trees within the garden walls, low voices, and the occasional plane or helicopter overhead. The site was originally a market garden.
So I'm just going to jump forward a little bit to show you another bit. It's about 14 minutes long in total.
Alcohol and oil. Around the central circle, 4 beds demonstrate plants richest in key vitamins. In the vitamin C bed is a row of amaranthus, garnet red variety. There are 6 tall plants that reach to around chest height and have narrow bright red stalks. Their rounded leaves are burgundy in colour, and the seed heads, which flourish all the way up the stalks, are long tassels that droop down, fuzzy with thousands of vibrant dark red seeds. Amaranth is a protein-rich, gluten-free grain and a distant relation to Swiss chard and spinach. Today, a small brown furry field mouse stretches between 2 bright red stalks of the amaranthus, nibbling at its swishing seed. The stalks tremble under the weight of the mouse as, whiskers bristling, it snaps off a section of seed head and moves briskly on. Also in the spice section.
So I didn't want to let it go without showing you our little mouse, which is my favourite bit of the video. Okay. So well, first of all, I'm going to tell you how we set up the experiment. So before I talk about the results. So we had people watch the video, and then we had them fill in a questionnaire, which we used accredited enjoyment scores and presence scores and various other things that we wanted to collect. In fact, as usual, we've got way too much data and we haven't done very much with a lot of it, but lovely to have so much data. And then 2 weeks later, we did a follow-up questionnaire looking at similar measures of enjoyment and presence and memory as well. So results-wise, this is just a sort of few bits that I've pulled out. There is going to be an article which is almost ready, almost written. Sorry, it is written, it's almost ready to be submitted. So we found that both blind and partially blind people and sighted people reported that they felt that they had just been in nature. And I guess, you know, cast your mind back to 2020, when we were all sitting at home. I think we released it sort of towards the end of 2020. We were quite pleased with these findings. They also reported, both participant groups reported increased well-being, and both participant groups reported that they had a desire to visit the garden and to be in nature. And my slide has a picture of a lady smelling a basil plant on it. Differences between the two groups. The presence score was higher in the blind and partially blind group. So the feeling that they were immersed in the video, in the film, was higher in that group. And interestingly to me anyway, the blind and partially blind group rated the inclusion of the non-multisensory language, so that the context and the historical information, more highly than the non-blind group. Which was interesting and probably the opposite to what I might have expected. And we also found that there was a higher follow-up engagement in the blind and partially blind group, so the intention to visit and the intention to be in nature and to visit a similar heritage garden. So as a follow-on from this project, we applied for some AHRC TechName money, and we're very happy to get it. So we have a PhD student who has taken our original project basically and kind of molded it. And my slide now has a picture of the Chelsea Physic Garden on it, so you can see the garden beds and the buildings in the street behind. So Jessica, who unfortunately can't be here, she started in 2021, and her research questions are: what is the source text of a historic garden? What is the sensory experience of being in the garden for blind and partially blind visitors? And what is the optimum style of audio description to enhance the visitor experience for both sighted and blind and partially blind visitors? So what she's doing is a series of studies. She's done the first study, which was a questionnaire about the garden experience, so addressing the first research question, and she's actually done that over 3 gardens. So the Chelsea Physic Garden is the main garden, and that's where she's based, and the collaborative doctoral award is together with the Chelsea Physic Garden. But she also included Edinburgh Botanic Gardens and a garden called the Wilderness, which is in South London. Her initial results for that study are very sort of similar to the results that we got for our study, sort of emphasize the feeling of well-being and the well-being effects of being in nature, and sort of talk about that as the aim for garden visits, certainly aims and outcomes. She's now actually in the middle of doing walking interviews with blind and partially blind visitors in the Chelsea Physic Garden, and a sort of co-creation type activity, talking about their experience and looking at sort of multisensory ways of describing the experience. Then we're very excited because the garden have decided that they want to do an audio guide to their glass houses, and they've asked us if we can do some work to empirically ascertain the best sort of style of guide. So we're going to be able to test, hopefully, if everything sort of aligns, standard audio guide against a classic audio described guide against a sort of more multisensory creative audio described guide, and see which is most prepared. preferred even. And then Jessica's going to do a study about language as well. She's going to look more specifically. She's got a translation studies background. She's going to look more specifically using corpus analysis at the language used in the guides. So when I was coming to do this, I was thinking about the ways in which this could be helpful for teaching. There is a link to the film on one of the slides, and there's also a QR code that's coming up. And you're very, very welcome, those of you that are teaching accessibility and audio description, to use the film if you wish to use it, obviously with appropriate credit or citation. So I was thinking, things that I might do in my class, look at the film, have the students think about the way in which the film is different from a sort of standard audio described film, have them think about whether it works. Does it work? Does it do what it should do? Is it enjoyable? It's a useful tool to provoke discussion about inclusion, and about the idea that it's problematic, because certainly as a team we feel it's problematic that audio description is created by sighted people for blind and partially blind people. The ideas of blindness gain are interesting in the teaching capacity, and also the idea of the accessibility spectrum. I also feel that our work and the sort of direction it's going in has a lot of parallels and a lot of crossovers with work that's happening in Screen AD about what's sometimes called creative AD, and it's got lots of other names as well, but the idea that, and also the objectivity versus subjectivity debate in audio description. So the idea that perhaps one of the characters in a film could be the audio describer, and a more kind of incorporated instead of a sort of separate type of audio description. And the idea that perhaps some subjectivity might be interesting or useful. So that might be something that you can explore with a class. And then obviously there's a sort of practical application, a practical task. You could have the students create something similar. So thinking about a tour guide or a narration for something, for a sculpture or for a painting or for an experience, you could, if you have nice campus, you can think about that, starting from AD principles as opposed to kind of bolting AD on at the end. Further work, so we're sort of halfway through now a project called the Wicked Project, which is doing co-creation workshops in art galleries, both here and in the US, and then evaluating the outputs of that. We're also putting in for another PhD studentship, which is going to be based in an art gallery this time, foregrounding disability narratives in art, and also building a non-visual interpretation of artworks into the visitor experience. I've also got a PhD student who's working on inclusive design in football. She's nearly finished now. That's ongoing. That's in Pedregosa. And just a last sort of shout out, there are 11 days left of, so anyone that's in London or coming to London, there are 11 days left of the In Plain Sight exhibition at the Wellcome Collection, which is in central London. And it was actually developed with some of my collaborators, and it's thinking about sight, but also there's a section of the exhibition that's thinking about devisualizing the experience of being in the museum, and there's some work by blind and partially blind artists there as well, so it's definitely worth a visit if you are in London. And that is it for me. There's a slide here with another picture from the Chelsea Physic Garden from the still from the video with some sunflowers on it. There is a QR code for the garden tour. There is my email, which is l.bywood@westminster.ac.uk, and my Twitter is @LindsayBywood. The next slides are just questions, and for academic rigor, you can see the references there, but I'm sure the slides will be available. I haven't been able to look at the chat, but questions?
Thank you so much. In the chat, we had a question about the link to the video tour being shared, but I think that's covered by the QR code.
Sorry, which I've just gone off. Should I put it back?
Yes, please.